Art Cody graduated from West Point, served as a helicopter pilot for the U.S. Army and Navy Reserve, and was the Air Watch officer aboard the USS Enterprise when the U.S. went to war after September 11th. In 2011, he was again called up as a reservist and served in Kabul, Afghanistan, where he was awarded the Bronze Star. He sat down with Ned to talk about his civilian life as a lawyer and how his belief in the dignity of life made him a crusader against the death penalty.
Art, good to see you again.
As well.
All right, let's get started. Tell me, in high school you decided to go to West Point. Why did you do that?
I think like many young people, I had a sense of adventure, also a sense of wanting to contribute, and also in my own mind, not a small measure of patriotism. And I think West Point fit all three of those, and I was impressed by its academic reputation and just its reputation as a school, and the leadership training it gives you to serve not only in the Army but in the nation if you decide to depart from the Army.
Did what you learned there conflict with your own value system?
I don't think so. I think in many ways the school's bedrock concept is its motto: duty, honor, and country. And I think regardless of what endeavor you go into, as MacArthur said, you will always have those in the back of your mind. And I find even though I haven't taken my career path has not been a traditional West Point career path. You don't find too many West Pointers doing death penalty abolition work. But the idea of a duty to a higher cause and to perform that duty honorably and in the service of your country, even if it's not necessarily military service of the country, but in the service of your countrymen, still rang true for me. So I didn't really find West Point's values in conflict with my own beliefs, particularly my own Catholicism.
When did you start thinking that you wanted to work against the death penalty?
The earliest I can remember thinking about it, well, let me start off by saying I think my opposition to the death penalty is firmly rooted in my Catholic faith. But when I first started thinking about the death penalty, it wasn't in some spiritual or academic realm, but rather it was as a 7-year-old watching afternoon movies. And I can remember, it must have been, I suppose, Jimmy Cagney week on the 4:30 movie. And I can remember Jimmy Cagney was always going to the electric chair. And I can remember thinking to myself what it must be like for a person to be taken from their cell, knowing their life is going to end very soon, and to be walked down the hall, strapped into this machine, and have their life taken from them in a painful manner. What must that be like? And what really struck me is the Jesus that I was being taught about at St. Clair's School, where I was going to grammar school, he wouldn't approve of this. This isn't the merciful, kind, forgiving, redemptive Jesus that I was being educated about. So I think that 7-year-old's belief through the course of 12 years of Catholic education, 15 if you count Notre Dame Law School, that reinforced my belief that this was wrong, that this is not what the gospel talked about. And I thought about in terms of what Christ talked about in whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers. Also in him forgiving the woman caught in adultery, saying, let the one among you who has no sin cast the first stone. And as I went through life, that continued to be reinforced, not only through my religious upbringing, but also what Catholic leaders would do. And a couple of instances that really come to mind. One is when Mother Teresa went to San Quentin in 1987. One of the things she said was, echoing Christ's words, what you do to these men, you do to God. Later in 95, now St. John Paul II, I think, made a very important statement that resonated with Catholics. When he talked about in his encyclical Evangelium Vitae, or the Gospel of Life, he talked about how we should only take life when it's absolutely necessary to prevent further taking of life. That is, he talked a lot about the dignity of life, even the offender's life, and how the real purpose of punishment is to redress the offense. So, and later in 1999, when the Pope came to the United States, he talked about how the death penalty in the United States was cruel and harsh. And he called upon people to abolish it, called upon all nations to abolish it. So the way I look at it, I'm just doing the Pope's heavy lifting.
What happened once you graduated at West Point? What did you do?
I became an Army helicopter pilot, and my wife was also a West Point graduate. And we were stationed not too far apart, lived in the same house, in what was then West Germany, now Germany. And I flew helicopters for the Army for roughly 5 years. And I got out of the Army in 1987 and moved to California.
And then you began your civilian practice, correct?
No, actually, initially I was an engineer.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yes, I was an engineer for McDonnell Douglas, and I worked on a variety of aircraft. In fact, one of the aircraft I worked on, the C-17, actually brought me home from Afghanistan. So in any event...
so you could fly him and fix him?
No, I couldn't fly a C-17. I could.
Yeah.
I sat in the back of that.
Yeah.
Much safer that way. In any event, the nearest base to me in California was a Navy helicopter base, because I wanted to stay in the military. I wanted to pursue a civilian career, but the reserves really gives you the unique opportunity to have a foot in both camps, which I think has very much helped me in my current position. But so I was working as an engineer during the week, but in the afternoons, on Friday afternoon, I would drive up to Point Mugu, California, and literally jump in an HH-60 special operations helicopter with night vision goggles, the whole 9 yards, and go from my 9 to 5 job to low over the water at night, which really it was a great weekend job.
September 11th happens, changes the world. Did you know, what were your thoughts then? Did you know you were going to get called back up? I mean, what happened to you then?
I think everybody remembers where they were on September 11th.
Right.
And I think my particular situation was somewhat unique. I had a tendency to procrastinate a bit on when to do my 2 weeks of active duty. I tended to do them towards the end of the fiscal year. So it's the beginning of September, and I go from New York to Bahrain. And from Bahrain, I'm flown on a twin-engine aircraft. I land on the back of the USS Enterprise.
Right.
I'm going to do my 2 weeks on the Enterprise. We were in the Indian Ocean on our way to Cape Town for a port call. And literally watched the second plane hit. And as a New Yorker, it definitely had an effect on me, realizing I don't work more than a short subway ride from the two buildings that were hit.
What was the feeling in the room? Was there a lot of desire to kill, to get into war? And were you conflicted with this? What were your feelings? And what were the feelings of the people you were with?
What really struck me, I think 3 things struck me. And the first was that night, it's the night of September 11th. The ship's captain, at that time it was Captain Sandy Winnefeld, now I think he's a 4-star admiral, got on the ship's PA system, we call it the 1MC. And he talked to everyone about how we are at a very distinct point in history. Then he mentioned, this isn't about retribution. This is about defense of the homeland. And that really struck me, because my own beliefs in that you only take life when it's absolutely necessary. What Captain Winnefeld talked about was that this is in defense. This is to prevent further killing. What we will do, and there was some, at that point we weren't totally sure what we were going to be doing. What we will do will be in defense of our country. The second thing that struck me, and I'm not sure how many Americans know this, is that it is very common on a ship of that size to have an Islamic chaplain. And the chaplains are normally called chaps, whether he's Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, Islam, it's just chaps. And the Islamic chaplain, literally, he wore a flight suit that had the crescent on it. And I didn't expect him to be treated any differently, and he wasn't. He was still chaps, treated like everyone else. And I think what that drove home to me is that whatever we do on this ship, this is about preventing future terrorism. It's not about punishing any religion, particularly not Islam. And the last thing that struck me as I look back upon the experiences on the Enterprise, the youth. You literally had 19, 20-year-old sailors going to and fro and getting things done without complaint, working 16, 18, 20-hour days to get the mission done.
Were you still on board when we actually went to war?
Yes.
You were?
Yes. In fact, I was the air watch officer. I had my regular job during the day, was the personnel officer.
Well, how did you feel about knowing, even though, historical, but knowing that these are going to go out there and kill probably a lot of civilians as well?
One thing that I'll always remember is there much more effort, I believe, is put into minimizing, if not eliminating, collateral damage than the military gets credit for. I'm very much, as I mentioned previously, I'm very much into the dignity of life, so I think I'm attuned to that.
Once you were back here, when did you actually begin working as a anti-death penalty lawyer?
I would say that I did some work in law school. I went to Notre Dame in 1993.
Right.
And one of the things that struck me about Notre Dame, it was very much, if you want peace, work for justice. I wouldn't say it's a motto of the school, but certainly it's one of the undercurrents. So while there, I started the Notre Dame Coalition to abolish the death penalty. Part of my work there also was to assist with the Center for Civil and Human Rights in writing what's called amicus briefs to the Supreme Court on a couple different cases. When I left law school in '96, I came to New York, and one of the first things I did was to get working on doing committee work for committees that were opposed to the death penalty. I really started litigating cases shortly thereafter, working with the NAACP, and on capital cases. I say that case that I was heaviest involved in was in 2000, when I was with Patterson Belknap and started working on an Alabama case, the state versus Richard E. Gaddy.
Right.
And I did that for 10 years.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that case. He was convicted of a pretty violent murder, and people did want to put him to death. Why shouldn't he be put to death?
I think, first of all, you have to look at the death penalty in the general sense. And what does our faith call us to do? And we have to think about, are we all about retribution, or are we more all about what the gospel calls us to do? Are we the one without sin? Is he the least of our brothers? And for me, those questions always came home, yes, I'm about this individual, this child of God. That's in the general sense. I think also, if I've done a lot of death penalty work, and I don't think you can ever excuse what people do, assuming of course that they actually are guilty, and as you may know, there's quite a few people who have been exonerated. But even given that they're guilty of the crimes they are accused of, you have to look at the individual defendant, get a sense of what is it that placed them on death row. What are the circumstances that they came from? Generally speaking, they don't have, not even generally speaking, I've read an awful lot of habeas cases, and they didn't have the support systems, they didn't have the people to lead them down the right path. So they through their own actions as well, they end up on this path. But one of the things that always has rang in my mind, and particularly from working with people like Richard's, people are not as bad as the worst thing they've ever done. One thing that has always struck me is you find a lot of faith on death row. And people who grow up on death row and grow up in their faith on death row, they go there as 23, 24-year-olds. And somewhat like in the Shawshank Redemption, in Red's case, he realizes, hey, I'm not that kid that did all these horrible things, okay? And I can't go back and save that kid, but I'm sorry for what I did. And that is an awful lot of the population of death row. So in my work with Richard, I thought that he was a person who certainly did not have the no father, absentee mother, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physically abused as a child. Those are the kind of people, unfortunately, end up on death row. And so I think in his case, aside from the general abolition of death penalty, he was not the type of person that we should be executing.
Well, seeing it from the perspective, say, of the family of the victim, do you think that they want to do it just for vengeance, and maybe sometimes that's okay?
I think that people make the assumption that victims are all about retribution. That's not always true. And I think that victims really are more about being restored, being back to where they were. And at times, the myth that the only way to make them whole is to kill the offender, I think really is an abuse of the victim. And it's
Right.
using the victim as a tool. When in reality, what we really want to do is restore both the victim and the offender.
And have you seen yourself change quite a bit from meeting these people?
You get lessons from sometimes strange places. And one instance has always stuck with me. Mr. Gaddy's state appeal had been denied, and we were going to federal court. So I was the primary point of contact with Richard, and I would go and brief him on what was happening in his case.
Mm-hmm.
So we were sitting at a table in the prison, and I was going over the different issues that we were going to raise, and when we were going to raise them, and how we were going to raise them. And I mentioned the brief's due next Friday. I'll work on it over the weekend. We should be able to hand it in by Wednesday, because you didn't want to be late. So I'll bang it out over the weekend, and we'll get it done by Wednesday. And he stopped, and he said to me, "Don't do that."
Why?
And I said, "Richard, do you not want to file an appeal?" He goes, "No, I don't want you to work on it over the weekend." I said, "Richard, why not?" And he goes, "You have 2 kids, don't you?
Yeah.
And you have 2 boys still at home, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Take it from me, someone who never had a father. The most important thing you can do is to spend time with those boys." So, that's something I really took from that, because here's a person who knows the effect of not having parenting and what it did. So, going from that, sometimes I think that's a gift he gave me.
All right, let's go back to what happened in 2011. You were
Sure.
called back to Afghanistan.
Correct.
Why were you called back, and what was your title? What did you do there? What happened?
Sure, I was at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul,
Mhm.
and I served as the staff director of the Interagency Rule of Law section. Really had three components. The first one was literally I was the chief of staff. I
Right.
worked on a daily basis with a staff of 30, some of them State Department employees, a lot of fellow military officers, JAG lawyers.
And what is a JAG?
A JAG is Judge Advocate General. It's a military lawyer. It's a lawyer who's in the military. And we had many Afghan nationals working for us as well. That was the first part of the job. Secondly, I was very much involved in the District Rule of Law program, which was to help the Afghan government in place judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys out into the more rural districts in Afghanistan. And lastly, drawing on my capital punishment experience in the States, the embassy asked me to take a good hard look at the Afghan death penalty.
But how do the people over there feel about us coming in, Americans coming in, and kind of imposing, I don't know if that's the right word, but imposing our way of justice, our way of thinking, our way of law into that very different kind of world where they're not used to, and maybe not even accept what we believe is justice?
I think impose is the wrong word. I think for starters, you can't. Even if you wanted to, you cannot impose a Western style system of justice. You cannot take a U.S. Southern District of New York template,
Mm-hmm.
pop it down in the middle of Kandahar province. It's not going to work. It's not the way that people do. It's not the way that people do business. So really, what we were a lot about was training, logistics, and facilitation of them designing their own justice system. Having said that, it was not without obstacles.
Yeah, I was going to say, are they open for that? Why would they accept foreigners coming in and wanting to change their system? I mean, were they unhappy with their system?
Well, I think that they didn't have a system.
Right.
I think the primary reasons, for example, the District Rule of Law system was really a system by which the Kabul government desired to place judges, train judges, out into the rural districts. Also, and this I think was very important, is it gave the people a place to go to have not Taliban justice, but a more educated justice, and a system that would allow a final decision, allow a decision to be made to give some stability to the country. So they didn't have to resort to a vigilante justice system, but rather a court where both sides could be heard and a decision could be rendered.
I understand that you visited the people on death row over there as
Yes.
well. What was that like?
Given my background, the State Department wanted or asked me to take a look at the Afghan system of capital punishment and to report and make recommendations. And I had the opportunity to talk to 15 inmates. Roughly 5 of them told me in no uncertain terms that they were not under sentence of death. So
Right.
literally they did not know that they had a death sentence.
That's
and
crazy.
I think it was crazy.
Yeah.
And I try to make sure I'm asking the right question and doesn't lose something in translation. But no, they were quite certain they had 20 years, which is in Afghanistan is called long imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
So how they're finding out about it is they're having this American Navy captain mention it to them, which is,
Wow.
generally speaking, not the way you want to be informed.
So what do you miss most about Afghanistan?
I think two things, really. One, the dedication of the people I worked with. And I think that the military, and rightly so, gets a great deal of credit for the sacrifices they make. But one of the things that really my eyes were open to is how hard State Department people work, and their courage and their bravery. Often I would go out fully, heavily armed, and they're going out armed with a notepad.
Right.
And they were people of dedication, courage, and conviction. Secondly, the diversity of people I had the opportunity to work with. The U.S. Embassy was literally right down the street from the International Security Assistance Force main base. And I can remember walking down the main street of what we called ISAF, and you would see the Danish headquarters would be here, the Norwegian headquarters would be here, and all the flags would be flying, the German headquarters would be down there. And I thought to myself, guys, this is just like Epcot, just with automatic weapons. So the diversity of people and their dedication is something that I will miss.
All right, let's move back more towards present day.
Sure.
Tell us about your work in Albany, what you're doing up there now.
I'm very happy to be the legal director of the Veterans Defense Program of New York State Defenders Association. What the Veterans Defense Program does is to assist veterans who are involved in either the criminal justice system or the family court system in New York State. For me, it strikes a particular chord. I get to continue to work in criminal defense and also keep my hand in and keep a connection to the military. America as a whole has put a great emphasis on supporting the troops. Mm-hmm. But there is a significant portion of those troops that really have been treated unfairly. And these are the troops who, because of what they've been exposed to in the military, not necessarily just combat, but what they've been exposed to in the military, have real mental health and sometimes physical health issues. Right. And when they get home to the United States, because of these mental health issues, and I'm talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, they have difficulties reintegrating. Yeah. Part of those difficulties sometimes find them in contact with the criminal justice system. But these battle-born injuries that they have, these mental health injuries, sometimes aren't very well understood by judges and juries. And so those troops that have committed crimes or accused of crimes, are no longer part of the troops that we support. So what the Veterans Defense Program tries to do is to make sure that each veteran's story is told to a judge or a jury or a prosecutor, so that the judge, the jury, the prosecutor can understand what this veteran went through, so they can understand what it's like to be rocketed 5 days a week for months on end, what it's like to spend Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's crouched over in a bunker. The veteran population of the United States is not that high, and even veterans did not necessarily go through this experience. So what we really try to do is make sure that narrative, make sure that vet's story is told to that judge, that jury, with the idea of not just merely dealing with the symptom of their ailments by putting them in prison for the crime they're accused of, but rather go to the root cause, that is treat the underlying issue, treat the injury that they're suffering from.
Okay, as we finish up here, you had shared an email with me, and it was really quite moving. And I was wondering if I could get you to read that.
Sure. I sent this, this literally is my last email from Afghanistan. And I sent this on, from Kandahar Airfield on May 15th of 2012. And every week, what I would do is I would send the names of folks we lost back to Church in Ridgewood and ask them to pray for the families. Friends, please remember our losses this week in your prayers. And then I named the names. This is likely the last time I will have the sad privilege of reporting our losses to you. I do so with the same anguish I felt a year ago. Perhaps more so for having worked with the young men and women from whose ranks the above names are too often drawn. My ability to opine on the strategic merits of our presence here is limited and not particularly relevant. I see only a small portion of the complex engine that drives Afghanistan's future. I think it is important, however, that I give you a sense of the quality of those our nation and its allies sent here. A more selfless and dedicated lot you will not meet. While they each have their own imperfections, to a man and woman, they are willing to live up to today's gospel and, quote, lay down their lives for their friends, unquote. Far too frequently they bravely do so. My time in Afghanistan draws to a close as I start the long journey home. I am fine and very much look forward to throwing a baseball with Pat and Ryan, my two sons. Good souls that they are. On this Mother's Day, I remember that my wife Stacy has done a wonderful job with our boys, and I'm thankful. I have a new grandson to hang out with as well. Thus, while I will not tarry walking to the C-17, I will miss the people I had the privilege of working with over there. Amidst the diversities of nationalities and cultures, the bond amongst the coalition troops is palpable. Not sure we experienced that in the civilian sector in quite the same way. I sincerely thank you for your prayers and your support to me and my family. Please continue to remember the sisters and brothers in arms that I leave behind. It was an honor to serve. Cody, counting